Welcome to the second video in the series about a survey of AI ethics. This is meant to think about the different ways that people tend to approach the ethics of artificial intelligence. And I do mean tend, because most of the things I'm talking about aren't like official theories that people subscribe to and say, hey, I'm a card-carrying member of this theory. They just like tend to take this approach, and sometimes they'll take like little pieces of multiple approaches. But I think it's helpful because there's so much written out there. But if you can kind of stand back and think about, okay, where is this person probably coming from? That's really a helpful way to understand what's being written and how to evaluate it. And a second benefit of doing this is I can talk a bit about the approach that we're taking in this series. So the first approach I'm calling techno-skepticism. So this is not like an official theory. This is not an official name. I just made up this name, as far as I know, for the purposes of this series. The tendency here is to be skeptical of technology in general, not specifically digital technology, but that is also an object of skepticism, but just technology in general. Now, not truly all technology. Most people don't have problems with like real basic kinds of tools or whatever. But the energy for this kind of skepticism really came from the Industrial Revolution, right? We started inventing all these ways to really change planet Earth without really thinking through the consequences there. And so we have all these technologies that have tons of negative externalities, for example, climate change. And so this kind of skepticism also resides with AI technologies. So say, hey, here's a new technology, here's a new thing that we can do. And kind of the response, the first response here is saying, okay, so what sort of mischief is this going to create now? All right, so that's one approach I'm calling techno-skepticism. A second I'm calling system skepticism. Again, not a real name, not a real theory that people have on business cards or anything. And in practice, it's pretty hard to tell this apart from the skepticism of technology in general. And the reason is because, you know, the Venn diagram with the circles of people who are skeptical of technology and also skeptical of systems are pretty much the same list. But there is a logical space to talk about the differences, and sometimes it's helpful to understand what those differences are. So this suspicion is not directed at the technology themselves, but the people that create and use the technology. It's not the people, but the organizations that do it. The corporations, the governments. The idea here is that, look, I mean, who's at the head of governments? Who's at the head of corporations? It is the powerful, right? By definition, the ones that have succeeded in getting that kind of power for themselves. So what do? Like, what kinds of things what kind of projects do they engage in? Well, I mean, sometimes it can be like fairly altruistic things, but not typically. That's not typically how it works. So the skeptic here would say, well, look, these things that these corporations are doing are to benefit themselves. The powerful are benefiting themselves. Sometimes it might turn out that some of the things they're doing, the interests align with the interest of the common people, and so that's fine. But that's certainly not typically the case, at least according to this position. So, for example, you could be skeptical of social media in general. Right? You could think that social media is a bad technology. It's a technology that we got excited about. We're like, hey, cool, look, we can do this. Now we can communicate with all these people in a casual way that aren't close to us physically. Isn't that so cool? Then that technology has like had the effect of, at least according to the techno-skeptic, like moving us farther and farther away from our human nature, our true human selves, what makes us thrive and what makes us great as human beings. But you could also focus not on the technology, but on the organizations that are rolling out this technology. So maybe your complaint isn't about like social media technologies specifically, but about, you know, Meta, you know, like who there's all these there's all these articles and case studies out there, but a lot of these algorithms are optimized to increase engagement, which sometimes has the effect of giving people things that probably isn't great for them. They become radicalized or become narrowly focused and think that what's popular is their narrow position is the popular one or something like that. But anyway, so that's just a little example to think about the difference between being skeptical of a system and being skeptical of a technology. Moving along the scale of pessimism and optimism, we get to the neutrality approach. So this is the idea that, look, any tool has good things and bad things. There's costs and benefits, right? But the technology itself isn't to blame. The technology itself is neutral. It's human beings, human nature, who use the technology well or use it for bad, right? So the ethical energy isn't against like the systems exactly. The ethical energy shouldn't be against the technology. The ethical energy should be against the bad apples who are misusing it. When you're talking to somebody that has the neutrality approach, they almost inevitably bring up the example of a hammer. And they say, look, a hammer can be used for good or for bad, right? We can use it to build or we can use it to hurt people. Hammers aren't good or bad. We shouldn't outlaw hammers. So the same should be true of all like digital technologies as well. Look, most of these approaches I'm not going to be critical of, but this is an exception because I do think this is a very widespread approach and a potentially very harmful approach. So let's think a little bit deeper about the analogy with a hammer. Is that a good analogy, a hammer to AI technologies? For many technologies, I would say it's a very poor analogy. And here's the reason. So if you add up the good things that we can do with the hammer and the bad things that can do with the hammer, and just look in a practical sense at how many times those things happen. Hammers are used for good or in a non-harmful way. 99.9999, obviously I'm making up the percent of the time. But like hammers are used to build things, they're used to fix things, they're used to hang pictures, right? Sometimes they could be used as paperweights. That would be okay. But that's how people actually use them. Now, are there really horrible, toxic people in the world that would take a hammer and cause harm to somebody? Yes. But when's the last time you read about a hammer attack? I mean, really, like this is, like we have to be, like morality isn't all about costs and benefits, but at some point you do have to think about costs and benefits, okay? For example, here's one I've written a little bit about, deepfake technology. Okay, deepfake technology, you've probably heard about this. You can take an image of a person, an existing person, or a video of a person, and make them say or do anything. Make them say any words you want. Make them do anything you want them to do, regardless of whether they've done it. It's like Photoshop on steroids. It's very realistic looking. Okay, so the inventors of this technology would say, well, it's the big deal. This is a neutral technology, like all technologies. It's just, people can use it for bad, people can use it for good. It's not our responsibility as the designers. And I look, again, morality is not all about costs and benefits, but at some point you do have to think about costs and benefits. The costs and benefits for the hammer, like the benefits are like a stack of 1,000,000 and the costs are like this, okay? So that's the hammers. I would say it's exactly the opposite for deepfake technology. Okay, so what can we do well? Like what does deepfake technology help us with? Well, you can use it to put people in movies that, for whatever reason, were not able to be there for the actual filming, right? So, we can make Star Wars more interesting because Princess Leia is there, even though Carrie Fisher passed away. Okay, is that a good thing? Sure, I guess, right? I mean, if people get a little bit more pleasure from their movies because of the deepfake technology, sure, I guess that counts as a benefit. Why not? As long as the person, who's being used consents to their presence on the screen. Okay, sure. But let's think about the harms, the potential harms of deepfake technology. Okay, so first of all, how it's being used mostly. right now is for non-consensual pornography. So people create these pornographic images and videos and like put famous people on them. But that's obviously a horrible violation of someone's autonomy, to say like, hey, here's something I would never do or never want to do, or like I didn't want to do it in this way or whatever, and saying like, well, now we're going to make you do this, say this. That's really bad. And that's really common, right? That's very, very common, extremely common. Another thing, this hasn't happened too much, fortunately, yes, but think about the ways that trust could be undermined at the level of a society or even at the level of a planet, right? If you can make government leaders look like they're saying something that they're not. Think about all the mischief you can cause, and think about the breakdown in social trust. So look, the potential harms for deepfake technology are like stacked up to 1,000,000, right? And the benefits are like this. So it's really the opposite of a hammer. Okay, so just be really careful with the neutrality approach. Another approach, sometimes it's called tech solutionism. So we're kind of like running through this skepticism scale. Now we're being optimistic. And so this would start out by saying like, look at all these problems that we have right now. We have huge problems: global warming, genocide, human trafficking, just like big, terrible problems, cancer that have been with us. And look, these problems that we've always had, that have always been around, we can now address in new ways with AI technology. So the idea is that, like, look, all this stuff that we're inventing has the potential for so much good. It has to solve so many problems. All right, I'm not going to say too much about that at this point, other than just adding it to the list. A fifth one, I did not make up this name. This phrase exists and is pretty commonly known: long-termism. So the idea is that, like, look, remember I gave you those 5 buckets of AI and ethics. They're saying like, okay, let's look at all the issues. Like, what's really important here? What's really important are the issues that can affect large, huge, billions, trillions if we talk about future persons, including future persons that wouldn't exist. We have to focus on those issues that are actually existential threats to humanity. That's where our ethical energy should be. Data privacy, algorithmic bias, yeah, those might be problems. But is that where we should focus our attention? No, we should focus on, and remember when I was talking about AI personhood ethics, we're really talking about this third category here, the existential stuff. The superintelligence concerns, can robots become sentient? Do they eliminate humanity? Artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, all these things that are about like, hey, how's this going to affect human existence? The long-termism crowd would say, yeah, I know there's a bunch of issues, I can recognize those issues, but because of numbers, we should focus specifically on the existential issues. Again, I'm not going to say much about that other than to add it to our list. And then there's the approach of this series that I'm calling the critical approach. These positions, neutrality thesis aside, there's a lot of logic to them, a lot of really convincing stuff, a lot of really convincing examples. So the critical approach is, in some meaningful senses, stuck in the middle, saying that, look, AI technologies do have this profound sense to harm us, and harm us at scale in ways that have never been imagined before. You think about the problems we have now, they can get a lot worse. But there are, in fact, a lot of really stubborn problems that have existed as long as humans have, that we might be able to actually address in new ways with AI technologies. And so there is that little branch of optimism that actually things, if we design it well, if our design is ethical and thinks forward about the potential misuses and the unintended consequences, like this could actually be a good thing, all these AI technologies, or many of them. All right, so I hope that's helpful as you digest different sources of AI ethics, watch videos, and and read articles and stuff, and really think about, okay, where are the authors or author coming from? Sometimes typically it won't be like neatly in one of those 6 approaches. It'll be kind of like a little bit of a blend. But I think it's a helpful way to think about how you should interpret those sources.